and here's Tyler Tabman's first place Nationals deck that he played. You guys know that it's WindUp. His deck is pretty conventional. I think it's definitely well constructed. I'll talk about the deck list first, and then we'll go into some of the tech choices that he made. And there weren't a ton here. He didn't exactly reinvent the wheel. 3 copies of WindUp Rabbit, 3 copies of WindUp Rat, 3 copies of WindUp Shark, 2 copies of WindUp Magician, not 3 Drew, not 1 Robbie, 2. 1 copy of WindUp Hunter, 3 copies of Tour Guide from the Underworld, 1 Sangan to go with the Tour Guides, 3 copies of Effect Veiler, 1 Lone Spirit Reaper, and 1 Gores. 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon, 1 Heavy Storm, 2 copies of WindUp Factory, 2 Instant Fusion, 1 Book of Moon, 1 Mind Control, 1 Pot of Avarice, 1 Monster Reborn, 1 Dark Hole. For the traps he played, 2 copies of Torrential Tribute, 2 copies of Bottomless, 2 copies of Solemn Warning, 1 Solemn to finish off the Solemn Brigade, and Mirror Force. I thought Mirror Force was a very solid pick in here. Mirror Force is losing so much favor, but people have to remember Insectors is starting to go away, and Chaos Dragons is starting to replace it. This card is fantastic against Chaos Dragons, so it's definitely a card that shouldn't be overlooked as much as people think. 1 copy or 2 copies of WindUp Factory. I'm not crazy about WindUp Factory. I will say this about Factory, though. It allows you, ironically enough, to divert attention away from your field by having this card. And what I mean is, WindUp Factory is a card that it puts all the attention on itself, and it takes off the attention of what your field actually has and some of your options. Like if you have WindUp Factory and a Rabbit on the field, your opponent they can't focus on trying to get the Factory off the field and worry about the loop that could happen next turn when you're searching things like WindUp Shark, which is probably what you're going to search most of the time, or in certain cases WindUp Magician. It basically says your opponent has to deal with one of those, but they probably can't deal with both. If they're so concerned about the loop, I mean, you can just play search a rabbit, search another rabbit, just play the control game and just beat their ass to death with cards like WindUp Rabbit that, I mean, for the most part, when it hits the field, can't ever really be killed, except for like Levier and Doka and stuff like that. So I think that 2 is the perfect number. Another thing about 3 is, if you play 3 WindUp Factory, I promise you will run out of stuff to search after about the second turn, especially if you have 2 on the field at the same time. So I'm not crazy about 3 WindUp Factory. If you're gonna play Factory, 2 is the perfect number. But it's a good card overall, because when you start with it, and like Rabbit, I mean, you kind of make so much advantage. Your opponent can lose sight of how to win the duel. He's playing 1 copy of Spirit Reaper. Now, I personally, I didn't take a page out of Fraser's book, but we ran similar cards. Like, a lot of people seem to either pick Snowman Eater or Spirit Reaper. They're both really good. They're both excellent against Chaos Dragons and against Dino matchup. It's pretty much a player preference thing. I've tested with Spirit Reaper, I've tested with Snowman Eater. I mean, they're both very productive cards, so this was definitely a good choice. Instant Fusion is starting to become the hidden gem of this deck, because it basically allows you to counteract the effects of cards like Effect Veiler, to where if you don't have the loop, especially if somebody foolishly would use Effect Veiler on a tour guide, you just play Instant Fusion and bada bing bada boom, you can continue your loop or you can start your loop. Another good thing about Instant Fusion, and what a lot of people are learning about this card, is when you add in a level 5, although this should have been Reaper on the Nightmare, because that card is absolutely bananas when you Monster Reborn it. When you add a level 5 in, it allows you to take cards like WindUp Shark, and rather than risking having to go into the loop, if your opponent doesn't have a field that is over-threatening, you can just summon Shark, activate Instant Fusion. Maybe they have that Effect Veil or something like that, and okay, well, you thought that I was going to try and loop you and not make a lot of field presence. No, I'm just going to go into Tyrus and I'm going to beat your ass with it. And your opponent's Effect Veiler is just sitting there wasted while they have, things like Torrential and Mirror Force sitting on the field, and they can't really do anything. You know what I mean? So definitely Instant Fusion is starting to be really good, because not only does it help you loop, but it also works really well with cards like WindUp Shark, getting you access to level 5s. Now, I do find it interesting that he didn't run My Stroke. I think the only reason behind that was WindUp has the tightest extra deck in the entire meta, basically. Like, there isn't a whole bunch of room for you to play with the extra deck. Like, a lot of times you will have to take out cards like, WindUp is a deck where you could potentially fill up 20 extra deck spots if you would have ran, Utopia Ray and Gaia Dragon for the rank 5 Xyz, and you know what I mean. So when I say stuff like you shouldn't run Crimson Ninja and WindUps, I'm not saying that because it's a bad card. I'm saying that because the extra deck space in WindUps is so tight that 15 cards doesn't seem like enough in many situations, guys. I mean, when you get to basically every card in the extra deck outside of Zemmighty, you can't even run more than one because the space is too tight. Overall, I think that his deck was definitely well constructed. Because people ask me so many times, I guess I'll go ahead and show my windups, especially considering that the cat is basically out of the bag now with windups. This was the most recent build that I had been using. Obviously, you see that it's a little different than what Tyler and the second place guy ran. I haven't seen Fraser's build, but I would imagine it's probably similar to this. Now, I had constantly made adjustments to the deck. At one time, I was playing Spirit Reapers instead of Snowmen, and so on and so forth. But basically, as the meta evolved, I basically just kept changing this deck. Now, there are some things that I would continually change about the deck right now. I'd probably put in a second Instant Fusion. I had been playing that at one point. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick peek at the deck as it was. Now, I do think that Tyler's performance is going to end up with a lot of people net decking this, but ultimately, I think it was just a very good meta call, and he said it before. I mean, when he played Final Countdown, that's what it was. It was a meta call. Same thing when he played Gravekeepers. It was a meta call. I mean, Chaos Dragons, the matchup against Chaos Dragons is very good. The Dino matchup is pretty decent, especially when you side cards like Snowman Eaters and Soul Takers. It can be very good. Obviously, he's siding more defense cards like Dust Tornado and D-Prison to combat that. Dust Tornado, you know, to remove things like Macrocosmos, which absolutely destroy this deck. But overall, I don't really feel like windups have a particularly poor matchup, except for Insectors, but Insectors have kind of fallen off the end of the earth. I mean, unless you're in Japan, you're not really seeing that much Insectors. So let me know what you guys thought of his deck, and click an ad, and I guess I'll see you guys later.